This video is about what we call the Formwork object. And the Formwork object doesn't really exist on the model side, but rather it exists on the drawings side. So right now we're looking at the model, so we don't see any Formwork object on the screen. What we do see on the screen are concrete columns and concrete beams, which have been created using the normal commands which we have in our menus. But as you can see, or as we know, that concrete is different from steel in the sense that while steel parts are all separate from each other and they get bolted or welded to each other, but concrete is a monolithic material. It is poured at the site, and what happens is that after the pouring, the entire concrete structure becomes one monolithic element. This monolithic element is what we call the formwork object. Now, this monolithic element doesn't exist on the model side, but it is created on the drawing side. And how is it created? It is created by actually taking up all the concrete parts and merging them together into one union part, which we call the formwork object. So for instance, what we see on the screen right now are 8 objects. There are 4 columns and there are 4 beams. And if you were to zoom in, you can easily see that everything is clashing with everything else. And I've paid no attention to ensuring that this beam actually ends exactly at the face of the column, and that beam ends exactly at the face of the column. But I've just entered them according to the finite element model, the way they should be, without really caring for how or whether they're clashing or not. Now, as I said, this will be unioned when it gets to the drawing side. So I've just, if I were to take you to the drawing side, and I've just imported that same view. I've created a drawing called GA1, and I've imported that view in it. And if you were to zoom in, you would see that those clashes are gone. If I select this, I will not be able to select the beam. I'm selecting the entire monolithic structure. So on the drawing side, instead of importing those beams and columns separately, what it has done is that it has converted them all into one object. Now, I can select the individual objects over here as well. If I were to press the Alt key, I can actually select the beam. Similarly, if I were to press the Alt key, I can select the column as well. That's for other purposes. That's for annotation purposes. But the reality is that on the drawing side, this has been converted into one monolithic object. And we'll talk a lot about this object. This is the whole purpose of this video, is to talk about this object and how it is unioned and what are the rules of unioning the model objects on the drawing side. But at the moment, I just want to say that it's one object. And if you were to double click on it, the dialog box of this formwork object will appear. So as you can see that it is saying formwork property editor. It's not saying beam property editor or frame property editor or anything of the sort. Had we imported some steel elements, you could have first of all selected them individually, and when you double click them, they would have come up as frame property editors. But right now, if I double click on this, you see the formwork property editor. And inside, one little thing which I'll just mention and then go back to the model is that you can see the individual IDs which have been unioned from the model side. So eight elements have been unioned to convert to create one formwork object. So now let's get back to the model side. And the first question which arises is, how does Comosys know which elements to union together? So for example, if I were to select a steel column over here and put it in there, and go back to my drawing and open the drawing, you will see that the steel column has not been unioned with the other formwork object. It's a separate object. So how did Comosys know which ones to union and which ones to not? Is it the fact that I used the concrete material and it separates the two according to their material? So for example, if I were to double click on this one and go to my general definitions, The material is C35 and it knows it's the type of this material is concrete, whereas the material of this one is a steel material. So is that the way it is differentiating from one object to another, and it is basically merging together everything which is made of the concrete material? No, that is not the case. The variable which it uses to decide on which elements to merge is not the material field, but rather the usage field over here, just under the material. Now, if I were to go back into the usage field, you can see that it says cast in place concrete. And if I were to open it, you can see that it consists of several options. The usage of any frame element or any plate element or any generic solid element for that matter can either be structural steel or embedded steel main part or embedded steel secondary part, or a cast in place concrete part, or a precast concrete part, or earth, which means basically the soil around the building, the excavated part. And these are the options which we have. And so whenever it's there are four. There's one more called grout, which is not mentioned over here, which we will see later. But there are basically these four types: cast in place concrete, precast concrete, earth, and grout. These are the four types which get union together. So if the usage of something is cast in place concrete, and so the usage of this column is cast in place concrete, the usage of this beam is cast in place concrete. Similarly, the usage of this beam is also cast in place concrete. So what Comosys will do that all the elements which it sees, which are cast in place concrete, they will get merged together on the drawing side. And since this particular one was not cast in place concrete, but rather it is structural steel. So that's how Comosys knew that I should not merge this with the others. Now I said that all the cast in place concretes will be merged together. Similarly, all the precast concrete parts can be made a separate group. They will never merge with the cast in place ones. Similarly, the earth related parts will form their own union or merged group on the drawing side, and just the same is true for the grout. But more often than not, you'll be using the cast in place concrete one. So let's focus on that. So anything which it finds to be cast in place concrete, it will merge on the drawing side. Now let me try and create a slab on top of these four columns and beams. And instead of using the slab command, which will directly create a cast in place concrete object, let me go to my steel menu and use the normal plate command, which has defaults of steel, and just go over these 4 points. And after having done so, let me double click on that and give it a thickness of 200 millimeters and put it in the behind position. Now we know that right now this is, if I were to go into the dialog box and open the general detailing, you will see that the usage is set to be structural steel. And so I know that if I were to go back to my drawing and go to the drawing manager and zoom in, you will see that that plate has not been merged. It can be selected independently as well. So let me come back to the modeling side and double click on the plate and convert it into a cast in place concrete. Now over here you see the fourth option as well. If you remember, I had said that there are 4 types of usages which get merged on the drawing side, and one of them is grout, one of them is well, actually there's plain concrete, there's prefabricated concrete, and there's cast in place concrete, and there's earth as well. So there are 5 actually. I said 4, but actually there are 5. There is earth, there is prefabricated concrete, there is cast in place, prefabricated or precast, same thing, cast in place, and plain concrete and grout. These 4 get merged together. So let me convert this to cast in place concrete and modify the plate. Now this plate has turned into a cast in place concrete plate. If I were to go back to my drawing side and go into the drawing, let me double click on that. You will see that now that plate has been merged into that single monolithic object. So this is how Comosys finds out or decides which objects it needs to merge into one. If I were to now select on this or double click on that, you will see that previously there were 8 objects, but now there are 9 objects over here, which have been unioned or merged together. Now that we've understood the concept of how Comosys decides which elements to merge together on the drawing side, let's go one step further and talk about something which we call the Formwork group. Now, let me once again go to my plate over here and create a little plate in the middle of the slab and give it a thickness of 200 as well, let's say, and bring it up rather than there, and even convert it into cast in place concrete rather than structural steel. So now this plate will also be merged. But let me do something else. Let me actually take this plate and copy it, make let's say 5 copies of this. So give it a Z offset of 200 and make let's say 4 more copies or 5 more copies of that plate, so that they're stacked one on top of the other, and they're all cast in place concrete. If you notice, because that was the first plate which I copied. And when I do that and I go back to my drawing side, you will see that the whole thing basically, because it's all cast in place concrete, has now been merged together into one single monolithic block. There are no lines over here, as you can see, nothing to separate those two. Now, why did I show this? I have already showed that they're union, but the reason I'm showing this is because I want to now introduce you to the concept of formwork groups. So what I'll do is I will select these 3 over here, this one and this one and this one, and I will press enter to open the dialog box. And they're all cast in place concrete, as you know, but I'll go to the detailing definitions, and over here we have something called the formwork group. And for the formwork group, let me first see what the formwork group of everything else is. So let me just double click on this plate, for example, and I can see that the formwork group of this one is 1. The formwork group of this column, so frames also have the formwork group. Let me go into the detailing definitions. The formwork group over here is also 1. Similarly, the formwork group of this beam is also 1. So all the elements right now on the screen have a formwork group of 1. But let me just now take these top 3 and press enter and change their formwork group to 2. So now I have made a change. Now everything in the model except these 3 plates at the top have a formwork group of 1, and these 3 have a formwork group of 2. But they're all cast in place concrete. So what's going to happen now? What effect does this variable have on the drawing side? So let me go to the drawing side and double click on the drawing once again. And what you will see is that this is one monolithic part. All these parts have a formwork group of 1. And these are those 3 plates. This little part over here is basically the merged version of those 3 plates. If I were to double click on this part, rather the other one, this one, if I were to double click on that, you will see that it has 3 objects which have been merged together from the model. Whereas this one will have 9 plus 3, so about 12 objects. So those are the 12 objects which have been merged together. So what does this mean? What this means is that over and above your cast in place concrete classification, you have a further classification to group objects within the cast in place group into subgroups. And you might ask that why would I need to do that? Isn't all cast in place concrete supposed to be monolithic? Well, that's true, and you can do that. But sometimes when you have very thick slabs, for instance, you might have a foundation slab which has a thickness of say 2 meters or 3 meters sometimes. In very heavy industrial plants, those kinds of thicknesses are possible. And you cannot pour the slab in one go, and you want certain, say, lines to appear between the two, the pour lines. So you can divide those into separate formwork groups. And by using this concept of formwork group, you can dictate to Comosys how the subgroups within the cast in place main group, cast in place concrete main group, will be union together. Now, if I were to come back to the modeling side and bring the formwork group of this one back to 1, so now we have a situation in which everything is 1 except for these two in the middle. So this one, which is actually separated from the rest, is still part of the same group. So everything else is 1, as you know, and this top plate has also been turned back into 1, but these two middle plates are 2. Now, if I were to go back to the drawing side and open the drawing again, you can see that now we can see these two lines over there. And the reason for that is that this particular one has the formwork group of 2. And if I were to select this one, actually the top one also gets selected. So so what I'm trying to say over here is that these parts which are unioned together or merged together on the drawing side don't necessarily have to be touching each other as well. They can be physically separate from each other, and they would still get merged into one object on the drawing side. So depending on your needs, I mean, this is all open to how you would want to use such a feature. But the formwork grouping feature is extremely powerful because, like I said, what it allows you to do is to create subgroups within your main group of cast in place concrete. Now, there is a special case of this formwork group variable, and that is when you assign it the value of 0. So right now we have these columns and beams and slabs with the formwork group of 1, and then a few plates in the middle with the formwork group of 2. But is there any specific meaning to assigning a value of 0 to the formwork group? So the meaning for that is, if I were to select everything and turn on my plates and select my plates only, and then go to the formwork group and give them a formwork group of 0. And similarly, now I select the whole thing again, and this time take the profiles and assign them also the formwork group of 0. Now, in this case, if I were to do that, this has a special meaning. Normally, you would think that since they're all 0 now, they would once again be union into one object on the drawing side. But 0 has a special meaning. And let's see what that meaning is. So let me go back to the drawing side, open up my drawing, and now you see that nothing has been unioned. Every one of them is a separate object. Every one of them is a formwork object, by the way. When I say they haven't been unioned, I don't mean that we are now importing the frames as they are. They're still being converted into the formwork object. But the formwork object is now composed of just one model object instead of being a merge of several model objects. Each one of them is now a formwork group, which is now being imported into the drawing side as a single as a formwork object which consists of only one piece. So this is a special meaning which we have for the number 0, which you can also use when you have reasons to actually keep the parts apart from each other. Now, obviously, the example which I was just showing, 4 columns and a slab, that's an extremely simplistic example. But in reality, you can have very, very complicated concrete structures. And over here, you see lots and lots of objects being modeled separately. But if I were to double click on any one of them and go to the properties, the usage has been set to cast in place concrete. You're not seeing it over here because this is a macro. But if I were to press D and double click on that, you would see that the usage is cast in place concrete. So this is the kind of complexity which we can then eventually have in our models. And if you were to go to the drawing side, for example, and go open the drawing side, and let's say open one of these existing drawings, you will see that what we have over here is not those plates and beams and columns, but rather one single monolithic object which has been merged or unioned into one. And if I were to double click on this one, you can see all the objects which were on the model side, which have now been merged together in the drawing to create one monolithic object. And this particular monolithic object, like I said, if you were to double click on it, it's not called a frame editor or a plate editor. It's called the formwork property editor because this is a new object. This is an object which didn't exist on the model side. This is a merged unioned object, and it's got its own characteristics. It's got its own property editor. So let's talk about this dialog box for a bit. Now, whenever you do a union of several objects. And then obviously your view will also have its up-down limits. So we know this from general our training on the drawing section, that we have up and down limits for our views on the drawing side as well, just like we have them for the modeling side. Now, you will obviously have taken this section from some point. This view has been taken from the model at some point, and there's a place where you're cutting the model, and then but you're also seeing deeper than that. So you're seeing about 2 meters deep from the point where you've taken the section. Now, what Comosys has, this option which it has, is that if you were to double click on that, it will tell you that first of all, you can have a line thickness, and this is for the main. All the lines which are visible will be of a line thickness of 0.4 millimeters, and they'll have a color of whatever color which you choose, and there will be a line type. And similarly, there will be a hidden line. So you might have hidden lines. So, for example, over here, you see this hidden line over there, and these hidden lines will be drawn. If I were to go back in and double click, will be drawn with the thickness of your choice, 0.3 in this case, and a different line color as well, and a different line style as well. And similarly, from the place where you take your section, you can decide to hatch it or not hatch it. So if I were to select don't hatch, then the cross section is not hatched from the point where the section is created. Obviously, it's depending on what your needs are. If you're doing a rebar drawing, you might not want to hatch it. If you're doing a formwork drawing, you will want to hatch it. And then you can have different styles for the hatch. You can give them an angle. You can give so if it's a vertical line, you can give it an angle of 45 degrees to create an inclined hatch, etc. You can give it a scale, which will have to do with how frequently. So if I were to convert this into a 1, for example, this will be there'll be fewer lines. If I were to convert it into a 2, there'll be even fewer. If I were to convert it into a 5, then there'll be even fewer. But so what you can see over here is that everything is not being hatched. If you notice, this part is hatched, but this part is not. And the reason for that is that this part is not at the exact point where the section is taken. This is somewhere a little deeper. It's somewhere in this 2050 zone. So you have control over how your formwork object will be hatched at the cross section, how the main lines will be drawn, with what thickness and what line style, what the hidden line will look like, what the line style will be, etc. And these are very useful features, because you can then save them away. You can say set as default, and all your subsequent imports of formwork objects, which basically means anything in the model, whether it's a frame or a plate or a generic solid, which has a usage of either cast in place concrete or precast concrete or grout or earth or plain concrete, those 5 objects, they will be merged together into this formwork property editor, and you can decide for once, you don't need to do this again and again, whether your or how the line styles and how the line thicknesses and how the sections, whether they will be hatched or not. All these variables you can set aside and set them as default according to your company standard. Now, if you remember, I had said that there are 5 types of objects which are merged together on the drawing side. There is the cast in place group, there is the precast group, there is the plain concrete group, there is the grout, and there is earth, which is for modeling the excavation. So I want to give an example for the earth one. So over here, there's this complicated structure from a cement plant, and around it, the detailer has modeled the soil. So this orange thing you see around it is basically the soil. If I were to just show that only, you will see that because the excavation was a complicated excavation with inclined slopes and all, so they've actually modeled the excavation, as you can see on the screen. And let me turn everything on, and there's more than one piece. So this one, if I were to double click on that, you can see that the usage is set to earth, not to cast in place concrete, which is telling Comosys that don't merge these with the other concrete elements, but create a separate group of those. And this object over here is also earth, so there's more than one object. And if I were to go to the drawing side and open up my drawing manager, and let's say open one of these. These are one of the excavation drawings which have been prepared. You can see that this is a plan view of the excavation. And once again, all those objects, all those multiple objects of category Earth on the model side have been merged together over here into one object, which is the formwork object, what we call. So, and if I were to double click on that, you can see that it consists of two objects from the model side, which have been merged together. But what I want to show over here is we had talked already about the line thicknesses of what is showing, the line thicknesses of the hidden lines and the line styles, and whether you want to hatch it or not. But now I want to talk about slope lines. So at the top, you see there is a general tab, which we've already talked about, the line thicknesses and basically the line types for the main line, for the hidden line, and for the sections. But there's another tab over here called stairs, which is because in concrete, you also merge together your staircase with the rest of the monolithic structure, and then you have the option of drawing the stair symbols and putting the stair numbers. By the stair symbols, I mean the arrow showing the direction in which the stairs are moving up. And because when you're looking at it from the plan view, you want to see that arrow which shows the direction. That's more of an architectural requirement, but you have this option in Comosys. And similarly, I want to talk about slope lines. Slope lines are typically used when you want to actually, so let's say you're looking at it from the plan view and you want to show whether certain surfaces of this merged object are sloped surfaces or not. So if I were to double click on this and go to my slope lines and turn them off, this is how it would look like. This is what the plan view would look like. And the user might not really be able to tell how these whether they are flat surfaces or curved or sloped downwards or whatever. So this is typical practice also for creating such drawings, that what we do is we create these slope lines, and when we turn them on, then any surface which is not horizontal or not vertical but has a slope will have these lines drawn next to it. And these lines will be drawn in a way that you can actually customize the gap, for example. So if I were to increase this to 2, you can increase the gap between the lines. Similarly, what you can do is you can reduce or increase the height of these lines to, let me reduce that to 3 millimeters, for example. So you can make them shorter if you want. Similarly, the minimum tick count, you can have at least so many lines. And the fill percentage basically means that how much of that total area, let's say this is the line length, so how much of that do you want filled up with these tick lines? So what you can do is say I only want about 25% of that. So a smaller portion of that entire surface will be ticked as shown. So this option is very useful because it allows you to create excavation drawings, if you will, using the same formwork object. And the formwork object, let's go back into the dialog box. Let's go quickly over it once again. On the right hand side, you will see the objects which have been merged from the model side. If you want to select any particular one of them, all you need to do is press the Alt key and select it, and that particular one will be selected. So right now you can see that this one has not been selected. Similarly, if I were to not press the Alt key and select the object, then the entire thing would be selected. But coming back into the dialog box, we have the line thickness for the main line, the line color, the line style, the hidden line thickness, the hidden line style. This option is for grade. Basically, you can turn anything, you can convert anything to be grade. And when you do that, basically these options are not used, and only the grade line thickness is used. And this is for example, when you are importing, let's say, a nearby existing structure into the drawing, and you don't want it to be dominant. You don't want it to look dominant in the drawing. You just want it kind of grayed out, but you want it to be there. So what you do is you just go in there and you select the grade option, and then it'll have its own single line thickness and a different color, and then you can turn it back on if you want, or back on and off. So this is a useful thing whenever you are importing into your into your drawing something which is not related to the structure at hand, but maybe a nearby existing structure which you also want to show in the drawings for whatever reason. And this grade option, by the way, is not only available in the Formwork property editor, but it's available in the frames and the plates and all those, or the bolts even. So you can show a complete nearby steel structure and gray it out as well. Similarly, we talked about the hatch style and the hatch angles and all that, and whether you want to hatch it or not. This the section from where from wherever the section has been taken, and you also have control over if there are any holes in the section. So you might have taken a section at a certain point, and that section might have a hole in it. So you have control over how that hole, how the holes inside the section will be drawn in their line thicknesses if you wanted to do that separately. And you also have an option of hatching those with a separate hatch option as well. So these are very advanced options, very useful options, which help you create very nice looking drawings, as you can see on the screen as well, automatically and directly by importing the 3D model into your 2D drawings. And since we are talking about formworks, the main thing which we need to remember is that the formwork object is not a model object, it's a drawing side object. It is created by merging elements which from the model, and as to which elements are merged together, that will depend on their usage grouping and also on the variable which we discussed called formwork group.